Hey there, hi there, ho there. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are coming to us from around the world. Welcome back to the Drones at Dawn podcast. Interdrone puts this podcast on. I'm your host, Dawn Zoldai, and it's been an incredible journey. We're in June now, and we started this in February, and it's been amazing. And we are dedicating this month of June to advanced air mobility. And who better to kick off this month with than Felipe Varon of Varon Vehicles? If you haven't heard about him, I don't know where you've been because he is everywhere. In fact, he's coming to us right now live from Colombia, where he is doing incredible work down there. We're going to talk about that here momentarily, but just a reminder, everybody, this is live. So please, please, please jump into the chat, ask your questions, make your comments, give Felipe and me some positive encouragement. We absolutely love that. So again, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in. And Felipe, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Don, how are you? Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be with you and to be able to share a bit with you and your audience about what we're doing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And let's talk a little bit about you first before we get into the work you're doing down in Colombia with advanced air mobility and your incredible vehicles. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm just an engineer with a view of the future in mobility, with a passion for flight, and just somebody who's trying to make that dream happen after a very, very long time. It's great to see all these enabling technologies becoming available, to see advances in materials, in software technology, and in aviation in general that combined are making all this possible. And that's really exciting because, as many people say it, I take it from other people, this is indeed a new Wright brothers moment. It's a new era in aviation. It's a new era in mobility, and we have tremendous challenges in mobility. We have a responsibility that we have to embrace with the environment, and many of the values are changing in society, and part of those values have to do with mobility. So it is a time of innovation in urban design, in smart cities, and in how we're going to make all that happen with an environmentally friendly view in mind. So yeah, very exciting moment.
And you were trained as an electrical engineer, if I recall correctly, MIT grad. Tell us a little bit about your background and maybe how you grew up in this industry and what led you to advanced air mobility and electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft.
So back as an electrical engineering student here in Colombia, I started tinkering with motors and electronics because I had this passion for flight. But I wanted to create a new way to fly, a new form that was more available to people, something was simpler and cheaper. And I started, just thinking about these rigid platforms with just electric motors and transferring all the burden and the complexity into the electronics of it. Back then, I'm talking about 1998, probably 99. Back then, the electronics were quite cumbersome. And we didn't have a name for these things. And I used to call them flying platforms. And because of that work that eventually turned to become my graduation thesis in 2003, I've been recognized or just as being one of the early inventors of the drone. We didn't have that word. It became popular. These platforms with motors just were a very unusual type of device, a new idea. But they became very popular. But the vision was always there. I always thought that once these machines could be made larger, more powerful, they would be able to carry people. And those would sometime become the transportation means of the future. And that future seems to be here.
Well,
so then, yeah, just to complete your question, then I moved into other studies in graduate studies in finances, in contracting law and other parts of general world. And part of that was done at MIT, a university that I have a lot of relationship with and that I'm very fond of because we've had some very interesting lines of cooperation being laid out for what we're doing right now at Varon Vehicles. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great segue. Let's talk a little bit about Varon vehicles and what your company does and what some of those lines of effort are with MIT and others.
So with them, we have the challenge of thinking about implementation. How we're going to make this happen in reality in our real cities, what the values are going to be. I mentioned the environment. 30% of greenhouse gas emissions come from mobility. And we have to have a responsibility as we invent new forms of mobility infrastructure. But it's not about traffic. It's not about urban air mobility and this idea of these so-called eVTOLs, something that I think we need to change in terms of name, but we call them eVTOLs. So these machines, right, these aircraft, we all thought at some point that they were going to be about flying over traffic, just moving faster from one point to the other in our cities because of congestion. But as we dig deeper into the problem over the years, we found that that's just part of it. It's true, that's one of the objectives, but that's incomplete. The complete picture is about mobility infrastructure and impact on socioeconomic development. How we're going to create value with that form of mobility and seeing that what we call urban air mobility as a new form of mobility infrastructure. Just like you have roads or train systems or metro systems or cable cars to connect cities and suburbs. Well, urban air mobility, it's another form of mobility infrastructure, just with a huge value, which is the legacy from aviation. And that's generating connection without the need to build anything in between. So here we come and say for public-private partnerships and other forms of infrastructure projects that we can generate connection without a cost per mile. And that's where the potential for disruption of this new form of mobility infrastructure lies. So the question we're trying to tackle with our friends at MIT is, how do we implement this infrastructure in the real cities, starting in Colombia, for Latin America, and what the values are for mobility and for connection and for society and for the environment in many different markets, including the quintessential air taxi, but also all the more evident ones like logistics, like government applications, disaster relief and others, like the medical industry, right, or the medical transportation services, and like tourism, that industry. So the question is, how do we implement this to generate value for socioeconomic development?
There's so much to unpack there. And I know you track both what's happening in the United States and obviously in Colombia, you just got back there. We've got President Biden's Build Back America plan, a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill bubbling around in this country. And, these conversations about advanced air mobility are really very nascent in the United States. So my question to you is, why Colombia? Why are you focusing on starting your initiative in Colombia?
Well, that's a great question. And there wasn't a clear answer for that. We are a Colombian team. I am Colombian by birth, and our entire team is Colombian. But it's not directly because of that reason. We were actually looking at a European country to implement our first system there. We are a US company to begin with. And of course, there's a lot being done, and like you well said, in the United States in terms of advanced air mobility and urban air mobility, because there's value for different parts of the world. But what we realize is that you cannot copy and then paste urban air mobility in one part of the world into another, because the urban nature is different, the cultural nature is different, there's economic differences, the needs are different. But we realize that the underlying problem that we're solving is a lack of proper mobility infrastructure. And that's why we talk about mobility infrastructure, because this is what we see urban air mobility to be, a new form of mobility infrastructure with a lot of advantages. So that problem, the lack of proper mobility infrastructure, is a problem that in Latin America is extensive, is tremendously systematic. There's a lack of capability from governments all across the region to provide and maintain the proper mobility infrastructure to allow cities to grow, to generate connections between suburbs and regions and so on. And that problem, that one underlying problem, it generates all the different symptoms that we see in the mobility problem, like inaccessibility, like, of course, the traffic and congestion, and so on, and many others, like air pollution and several other layers. And those symptoms are tremendously evident in Latin America because of that underlying problem being so bad here. Just as an example, in terms of just the traffic and the congestion, of the top 25 cities in the world with the worst traffic, 5 are Latin American cities. And 3 of those 5 cities are Colombian cities. And actually, according to the last rankings in the last couple of years, the number 1 most congested city in the world is this one I'm at right now. It's Bogota, the capital of Colombia. So that's a reality that reflects the underlying problem being so bad. So the answer to your question is, we chose to do it here, among other advantages and other strategic reasons, because the problem is so bad. So the impact that we want to have is so much clearer here in this region.
Well, I love that. It's like you're just running headfirst into the fire because it's almost like the toughest use case. In fact, Felipe, we had Daniel Conde on here a couple weeks ago speaking about Colombian drone regulations. He was involved in that 2015, the original regulation updated in 2018, and just speaking about Latin America drone regulations in general and how they're not maybe as wide open as you'd hope, like we see, for example, in Australia. In fact, Australia just put out a policy memo encouraging their different governing authorities to start putting that plan together for advanced air mobility. So that's very exciting. What do you see as the regulatory either advantages or challenges in Colombia when you're talking about this infrastructure that you're looking to build?
So we see that as an advantage. Actually, the fact that all these different symptoms in the mobility problem, which is quite complex, impacts everybody's quality of life here so badly, means that there's a lot of attention in different layers of the government and society to find solutions to that problem. And that is not something that the aviation authorities are unaware of. Actually, they want to be instrumental in being part of the solution. So one of our biggest partners actually in this region here is the Colombian Civil Aviation Authority. We've been working with them for many years in the development of this idea. They want to be in the forefront of the regulations, in the forefront of being an enabler for urban air mobility. That's one of our biggest and most important partners from within the Colombian government. It's the Colombian Civil Aviation Authority. And we're building, for example, with them, together with them, what we call our airspace integration architecture. In other words, these virtual lanes over the skies, the low altitude skies, through which our vertiports are going to be connected, with which they're going to be connected, and through which our aircraft fleets are going to be flying. So that architecture, we're developing that together with them, because they want to be actually leaders, world leaders in urban air mobility. So they're very open because of the problem being so bad. So that's one of the reasons why we're here, and we're very, very confident about the position that Colombia holds in the region in terms of being able to permeate technology development and innovation to other parts of the region. We see that as one of the advantages.
Yeah, again, so much to unpack there. And I know you and I have talked before, Felipe. I had the distinct privilege and pleasure to go to Bogota, Colombia, when I was a colonel in the United States Air Force as part of the Defense Institute for International Legal Studies. And at that time, it was about 20, probably right before that regulation was made, because we met with the Colombian Aviation Authority, the Colombian Air Force, law enforcement, and private industry to talk about what our regulations look like in the United States. And so really exciting times. And I love to hear that you guys are now working together with that authority to look at advanced air mobility. You may come out before we do, quite frankly, here in the United States. Well, let me pivot for a second because we have a question from Scott Schofman out in the audience. Scott is a regular listener. He's an attorney and a drone pilot from Texas. He's part of the Drone Service Providers Alliance. He asked, what do you view as the necessary infrastructure for mobility to thrive?
Well, if that's a general question about mobility, or is it about
It's probably
urban air
advanced
mobility?
air mobility. Yeah, like what you're trying to do, like what infrastructure, when you say infrastructure, that we need this infrastructure in Colombia, it may be different in other countries. What specifically are you talking about there?
So let me explain that a bit, and I appreciate Scott's question to be able to reflect back to you guys what it is that we're doing. We at Varon Vehicles, we're not developing any of the technologies. We're integrating them. We're producing a system of systems with which we can go out and provide transportation services to all those different markets. So we need to integrate different technologies that fall under three main categories. Number one, it's our vertiports. Number two, it's our airspace integration architecture. And number three, it's our fleets of aircraft. We're not developing any of those. We're working with dozens of partners, technology developers who are eventually, hopefully, going to become our technology providers. So we're integrating all those different technologies. So that collection, the number of vertiports in a city and suburb or region connected to each other, and our fleets of aircraft flying between them and servicing between them, we call that an infrastructure network. We see all that in its entirety, including its operation, as a new form of mobility infrastructure. Just like you have a metro system or a train system or a cable car, that's quite common here in Latin America, or a bus system or any other mobility infrastructure type. This is a new form. So that's why you hear me talking about mobility infrastructure, right? So with the big difference, of course, that this is not a physical mobility infrastructure. We don't need to throw asphalt or build bridges or dig tunnels to generate connection. And again, that's where the potential for disruption lies, in the fact that we don't need a cost per mile to generate connection. That's the legacy from aviation that we're bringing to the micro world of the cities, suburbs, and close around regions, right? That doesn't exist today. So what type of infrastructure? I think that the question Scott is asking goes towards the vertiports. That's the physical part of it. That's the main thing. But there's a lot of virtual infrastructure involved here. Weather systems, route generating systems, UTM, off-nominal situation management, and all these different capabilities, they're all infrastructure forms. They fall under what we call our TMS, our traffic management system. That's the part of our system that is in charge of orchestrating the traffic, of keeping it all safe.
And that's your airspace integration architecture that you mentioned, this TMS.
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And by the way, I think Sharon Rossmark's out there enjoying our conversation. So great to see you, Sharon. Sharon's our CEO of Women in Drones, doing amazing things, and kicked off Women in Drones Africa this year. So she's out there doing amazing things, just like you are, Felipe. So you mentioned partners. You mentioned that you are integrating a whole bunch of different with a bunch of different groups, obviously the Colombian Civil Aviation Authority. I mean, if you're able to share, I've seen on LinkedIn a couple of recent announcements, Felipe, of, hey, we've just partnered with so-and-so. Can you do a quick rundown of maybe a couple of the groups that you've recently partnered with and what they're bringing to the fight here?
Yeah, so it's been over a year plus that we've been consolidating that ecosystem of companies. Most of these technology providers come from the United States. Some of them are from Europe, and we're implementing in Latin America. We have an advantage of being able to do things simpler here. That means faster, safer, and cheaper as well. And that is a huge advantage, right? There's I think it's several dozen companies in the three different pillars that I mentioned: vertiports, airspace integration architecture, and aircraft. So we're working with aircraft OEMs. We've announced publicly companies such as John Deere Mobility. They have a fantastic aircraft that fits into one of the categories that we are looking at having in our fleets. We'll be operating sort of like an airline. That's a good analogy, even though it's a bit flawed, but it's a good analogy to think about what we're doing. It's sort of like an airline, right? And our aircraft are going to be chosen depending on the needs, and they're all going to be painted with the same logo of the airline, right? In this case, Varon vehicles. But there's other technology providers in the airspace integration side of it, right? In the TMS, in the traffic management system that we've made public. We've talked about companies like Aerial, like Resilience, like True Weather Solutions, and like ANRA. There's many very, very capable companies and world-renowned technology providers on those different areas that I mentioned a few of. And then we have our vertiports. That's where all the magic of urban air mobility is going to happen. Most people want to talk about the aircraft. That's the cool part of it. Everybody wants to talk about the aircraft, but the more you dig into it, and as years go by, you realize that all the challenges actually happen on the ground at the vertiport. That's what the logistics challenge is. And that's where we need to answer most of the questions, like how do we manage passengers? How's that going to happen? How do we put together this TMS to actually operate at the vertiports? Is it going to be at one vertiport of a network? Or is it going to be distributed among many vertiports of the network? Like some of the questions, like the energy part of it. And we try to answer that question because we're very deeply involved on the energy part of our business. Is that vertical tries to answer two main questions. Where and how do we get that energy to actually operate this whole system? Because we're talking about electric aircraft. So there's tremendous amounts of power that are needed for these eVTOLs to actually operate in a massive way, right? So how are we going to get that energy? Where from? That's a very tough question. And then how do we make that happen in an environmentally friendly way while making it cash flow efficient? So it's a very interesting question that we've been tackling for a long time, and we have a director for energy for that reason. So all this happens at the vertiports, you see, and there we've got partners that are very, very well renowned as well, like PS&S on the design of our vertiports, and that's a great collaboration we have with them. Like others like Skyports and many other companies that have very, very relevant ideas about how a vertiport should be designed, built, and then operated, right? So on those three, we have all those different partnerships. And like I said, most are from the United States and some from Europe.
Yeah, I know. I think you're working also with my buddy Rex Alexander, 5 Alpha. Rex is
Exactly.
such an expert on heliports and now, of course, vertiports. People are tapping his brain, and everybody out there, if you haven't seen his white paper that recently came out, he actually was just quoted in another NASA one he contributed to, but he did one on heliport accidents in the United States and kind of as lessons learned for vertiports. So great stuff. I've posted that out there. I'm going to post up his NASA one here shortly, but so you're also collaborating with Flight Crowd, out of the UK, and we had Maria Taranovska actually on Clubhouse last Thursday talking about some of the initiatives they're doing in Flight Crowd, and we had Ray Adams and Ron Leach from the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association as well. It was a really fun conversation. But Flight Crowd and you are working on a number of things, including, I think, what you're calling the Names Challenge. Can you tell us a little bit about, what's in a name, right? Like what's the point of this exercise that you all are doing?
So yeah, I just want to say that you mentioned Rex and Flight Crowd. And the value that they bring is the fact that these are very knowledgeable people from aviation. And that's hugely important. We're inventing a new form of mobility here. I'm one of the people who says that urban air mobility is not about aviation. It's about mobility, and that's a different perspective. But it does use aviation, right? That's a tool that we use to achieve the mission that we have. But so that knowledge from the aviation world is tremendously important, and we're really trying to leverage from those people who really know about aviation. So you mentioned the UAM Names Challenge, and that's something that we just launched probably a couple of weeks ago. We're having names already being proposed. And it's about the clear, very, very clear need for us to generate cohesion in this new industry, right? We're talking about things that we don't have a name for. Like, for example, the aircraft. Something, back, it's had an evolution. They used to be called flying platforms several decades ago. And then we moved into manned drones. Some people even call them drones, even though they're not unmanned. We're carrying people on them. Then the word or the term flying car came around, and for several years, and actually decades, these were referred to as flying cars, but then we have to move away from that because these aircraft are not about private ownership or point-to-point transportation. I mean, you're not going to be able, in any foreseeable future, anywhere in the world, to take your so-called flying car from your garage, go to the drugstore, and then go pick up your kid at school and then come back home. That's not going to happen. This is not about that sort of mobility idea. It's more like mobility as a service type of infrastructure, right? And again, talking about the values and mobility, well, that's one of the biggest ones. People now want to have mobility be a service. So we turned into eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing. And how horrible is that? I mean, us engineers, we have to stay away from trying to be PR people because we're not, and we're horrible at that.
Well, and not only that, but I mean, nobody, like the public, like you and I, we swim in the same circle.
Exactly.
The public at large, you say eVTOL, and they're like, "What? What are you talking about?"
Exactly.
So it's cumbersome. It's confusing to people. So what have you gotten some?
Oh, absolutely.
Like,
yeah, and that's the cool thing. We realize that we need names, and not just for the aircraft, for the onboard operators. We cannot keep calling them pilots because they're not the traditional pilot. And there's many other parts of our industry of urban air mobility where we need names, because names generate cohesion. It sends people's imagination, the collective imagination, in the same direction, so we can flow more easily. We're not tangling ourselves with explaining what we're talking about. So we're looking for the new automobile. We're looking for the new airplane. Where did those words come from? Just think about it. So we have a new era right now, and it's an opportunity for us to create the new car, right? Where did those words come from? If it weren't for that word a century ago, we would still be calling these automobiles, probably we would be calling them horseless carriages, right? Because that was the paradigm back then. Now we're breaking paradigms that have been well established for over a century in both aviation and in the automotive industry. Urban air mobility is a merger of those two industries. So we need names that stick in perpetuity, that people understand, and not just us in the industry, like you exactly well say, but regular people, so that they understand what we're doing, so that they understand what the values for them is and what these values are for them, right? So we created this UAM Names Challenge. It's open. You can all access it at varonvehicles.com/names-challenge, or you can just go to varonvehicles.com and you'll see that. And we've partnered with FlyCrowd on this effort to put this together. They have the best both capabilities and initiatives on the educational side, on the public outreach side, to be able to convey this need. And we've laid out a structure. We try to structure this in the best way possible, and we're already getting names. And the call is for anybody and everybody to propose the names that we need. Right now, we've opened 2 challenges: the new names for the aircraft, or eVTOLs, and the new names for the operators, the onboard so-called pilots. What are we going to call them? And yes, we've gotten some very interesting names. You can vote, and these challenges are going to be open in perpetuity. I mean, until we find a winner name that actually sticks, and that the entire ecosystem, our industry partners, share a positive feedback on as well.
So as an attorney, and for as long as I've been doing this, I've constantly said words matter. What I think is very interesting about what you just said, Felipe, that I'm not hearing widely discussed, but I actually agree with you on, is this idea that it's about mobility, period. And When, for example, you just focus on the FAA and tell the UAS integration people, oh, by the way, now you have to do this, but you're not working with the ground, right? Transportation people, the National, Highway Transportation Safety Agency as an example, or state and local governments who, of course, here, and I'm sure similarly in Colombia, at that local municipal level, as you said, the biggest challenge is on the ground at the vertiport level. That integration, that networked ability is critical. And it cannot be one organization in a stovepipe talking about this, because you're absolutely right. This is about mobility and how it links into the larger system. Because if it isn't, I don't know if you're aware, there's a paper going around. It was written in March 2020. I hate to give it a lot of credence because honestly, I don't agree with a lot of the statements in it, but it basically called urban air mobility, advanced air mobility, elitist, undemocratic, not environmentally friendly, all of these things. And, it's just going to be for the rich people that are just going to use it to get places faster. And really, when you look at what you're doing in Colombia, what you're doing is exactly the opposite of that. Because you are trying to make this a third dimension of travel and mobility for the masses, not just for people with big pocketbooks. So how would you respond to someone that frankly isn't very versed in this ecosystem that would make comments like that? What would your response be back to a person that says something like that?
Yeah, that question has actually been out quite a bit. I think it's quite simple. Urban air mobility has existed for many decades, and it's been just that, a service for a few VIPs, corporate people who can actually pay for it. It's not been successful as a transportation means. The helicopter has not been successful as a transportation means for the masses. It's fantastic of an aircraft for specific niches, but it's not being successful as mobility requires. But then now comes along these new generation in aviation aircraft and aviation technologies, electrification and fly-by-wire and so-called eVTOLs, right? That's a game changer. Urban air mobility has existed for many decades, but now we have a way so that aircraft are manufactured simpler, cheaper, with lower operational costs and MRO, maintenance, repair, and overhaul costs. And that's the key. That's the key to allow us to be more cash flow efficient, more economically efficient, which reflects into what you're saying, that we're able to provide those transportation services to not just to more people, but for more markets. Transportation services for the medical market or the medical needs, for the tourism needs, for logistics, et cetera, et cetera. And it's all about the fact that these new technologies are allowing them, hopefully, to become more economically efficient. And if we don't succeed to make this a transportation for more markets, we would have not done anything, because urban air mobility has existed for many decades.
You're absolutely right. And, some of the examples you've given, like healthcare as an example, I mean, we're seeing that with the smaller drones. It's only going to get more robust with the larger drones as we get more comfortable with that and carrying, organs and critical medical supplies. And, when you think about drones for good or what humanity needs, it's exactly that. And I know, Felipe, you also have background on the military side. And obviously I do as well, having spent almost 28 years dedicated in service to the United States Air Force in various capacities. What you see oftentimes is battlefield technologies being transferred to the commercial side and being really successful. And you have groups like AFWorks and Agility Prime, and they're looking at, personnel recovery, the idea that instead of, like you said, using a helicopter that has a crew of 6 people, or however many, with PJs on board looking for a downed airman, they can send in now a semi-autonomous vehicle or an autonomous vehicle with maybe 1 PJ on board, make all that happen. And then imagine, the as you said, the lower cost, the life savings, all of it, and quicker to get people back, because
Right.
I think they call it the golden hour. If you find someone on the battlefield and you can transport them within an hour, of their injury, the likelihood of their survivability is so much more increased and enhanced. So
Yeah.
just amazing things I think in the next couple of years we're going to be seeing. Well, it looks like we only have a couple minutes left. And Felipe, I would like to give you the opportunity. If we didn't cover anything or there's anything else you want to say before I make some admin announcements and we dial off, have at it. Here's your 30-second elevator speech, your last couple minutes of fame here.
Well, no, I appreciate being able again to share with your audience what we're doing. I think that urban mobility, it's an entire universe. It's not about aviation, frankly, just like in the Navy. Let me just give you an analogy here. I think I'm going to use these 20 seconds for that. The Navy does ships, right? They're in the water. How come they have helicopters? How come they have pilots and aviators? Well, it's because it's a tool for them to achieve their mission. For us, creating a new form of mobility infrastructure, having aircraft and all the aviation side is exactly that. It's a tool for us to achieve our mission. And our mission is on the urban side, it's on the city. How do we alleviate the pressure for city growth? How do we generate value for people, socioeconomic development, transporting produce from the fields into the markets where there is no connection, there is no roads or other forms of mobility infrastructure? How do we achieve doing that, right? With a new form, a next generation of aviation that is coming and becoming available and allowing us to actually generate and think about generating value for society. It's not about jumping over traffic. It's way broader than that. And the potential for that, it's all over. And we see that in terms of the new forms of employment and lines of research and all across the board that we can generate in this new industry. So it's a very exciting. My invitation for your audience on the drones world is just look into urban air mobility. There's many people around the world trying to make this happen, and it is going to happen. And I think it's one of the most exciting things that we're going to have since we had aviation first and automobiles first a century ago. So with that, I want to thank you for having me here. It's been great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about some of the great things you're doing out there, Felipe. You mentioned something, workforce development. And so for those that follow us and spread the word, we're focusing on advanced air mobility this month, but next month is on education, training, and workforce development. So, you cannot have a robust industry if you don't have the workforce to support it. So we're going to be talking with a bunch of folks about that. But in the meantime, for this month and for this week, a very special tomorrow night, Drone at Dusk happy hour with the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association. We've got several folks, in fact, not just Ray, Ron, Travis, Brian, we're bringing on Bronwyn Morgan as well. She's amazing. She just is a new board member at Ultra. So join us 5 p.m. Eastern for that tomorrow. And we'll be getting that Zoom link here soon. And then this Thursday on Clubhouse, we've got Peter Schmidt from Transcend Air. And that's at 11 o'clock Mountain and 1 o'clock Eastern every Thursday on Clubhouse Drop-in Audio Chat. And Peter then will be joining us live next Monday on this podcast, same time, same place. Transcend Air, doing some stuff out of Boston, doing it Boston style. So more to follow there. All right, that's what we've got for today. Thank you so much out here. Have a wonderful week. Hope to hear you on Clubhouse and see you tomorrow night and next Monday. Thank you.